Hello and welcome to lecture 7 of this Java tutorial series. Today we have something a little different. You can see here I have a tablet over here instead of our usual Eclipse interface, and I decided to mix things up a little bit and talk conceptually about what is known as object-oriented programming. And we're going to be talking a lot more about this in the future, but I decided that it would be good to give just a little glimpse of it to try and understand why we're going to use it and why we're going to be doing some of the things we're going to be doing in the future. So here we go. Object-oriented programming is what Java is really about. I explained in one of the first few videos that object-oriented programming means that everything is an object, and this probably didn't really have too much meaning. But what Java is really about is creating objects that interact with each other. And an object is called a class. And so when we started our program, I said something like class hello world. And I had some curly braces here. And our code went inside here. So what it turns out is that hello world is actually an object that we can give capabilities. And the hello world isn't the best example, but it was what was used just to introduce some programming. But for better example, let's say we had an object that we wanted to create, and that was a student. Now, I'm not going to go into specifics here right now. We'll do that later in Eclipse. But basically, I can give the student properties. So I could give the student properties like a name, an age, maybe a grade, something like that. And I could also give the student abilities. And these abilities are what we call methods. Abilities are called methods. And think about what a method is. If I tell you that I have a method to do something, that's sort of a way by which something happens. And so what we really have is that we have this class that is an object, i.e. an object. And this object can do certain things. These are all methods. This is a method, this is a method, and this is a method. And so to make this a little less abstract, I'll give an example with the student. Here's our class, student. And let's say one of the possible methods that a student could have would be to say hello. So when I create a student, I have all of this information here. It has all these properties. You can give him a name, you can give him an age, you can give him a grade. And he also has abilities. And you could say something like, student, say hello. And then maybe you define it so that when I say hello, the output is system.out.println. I'll even do this in blue since it's a string. Hello. Right? So when I tell the student to say hello, the student will print out hello. And so in that sense, I'm no longer dealing explicitly with this command here. I now have a hierarchy in which I can create an object, and then use its abilities. And this is useful because in Java, we can have lots of objects. Let's say you wanted to simulate a car. And so you could have one object be the car, and Here, I'll even write some of this out as an example. You could have one object be the car, but the car could kind of manage other objects as well. Maybe an engine, or a frame, or the interior. And so maybe your interior has a bunch of methods that help you use the air conditioning or the heater. And maybe the frame has methods that adjust the suspension, or bend under stress, or react to different environments. Or maybe when the car gets hit, the car will crash. And maybe the engine, well, the engine's kind of complicated, so we could even split that up into more components. And the engine manages more components, like maybe the spark plugs. And perhaps the gas inlet tubes, or the gas tubes. And so maybe you could tell the gas tubes, this is a method to inject fuel. Maybe you could tell the spark plugs to fire. And you would have a whole bunch of different spark plugs. All of the spark plugs have the same characteristics, but you can use the engine to talk to the spark plugs and tell them how to behave. And so now, instead of having this overwhelmingly complex system where you say, create a program that simulates a car. What do you mean a program that simulates a car? Well, all you really have to do is break it into its components. And what we find out is that objects are very real things. And really in Java, objects and methods have the same relationship as nouns and verbs in language. And so think about that. Car, engine, frame, interior, spark plugs, gas tubes. I'm not so much of a car guy, but those are all things that you can create. They have properties. They have colors. They have textures. They have weights. They have all sorts of things that you could assign to them, just like, I gave the example that we could assign properties to a student here. And then these methods, maybe they're complicated. Maybe I don't know exactly how all of this happens, and it requires lots of different calculations and stuff like that. But generally speaking, I can say spark plug fire and be confident that whatever code I've written in accordance with fire, just like I said, say hello, is equivalent to doing this. It simplifies things. And so if all of these things were already taken care of, then you wouldn't even need to know how they were made or exactly how they worked. But as long as you know how they were supposed to work together, you could use these layers of classes to orchestrate the entire system. And what's so useful about object-oriented programming is that when you have an object, you don't necessarily need to know exactly how it works, but you just need to know some inputs and outputs. When I use this method called inject fuel, as I call it, what's going to happen? What do I need to know? Are there certain parameters? And we'll find out that there are parameters. Is there an output that I get? There might be an output that you get, or it might just carry on another process or tell another method to occur. And I realize this is all very abstract, but I think the real takeaway from this is that Java is useful because it deals with essentially nouns and verbs. In our case, they're called objects and methods. And this is useful because they allow us to model the real world and model very physical things or really abstract things. If you wanted to create a picture, that picture could be an object. Or, if you wanted to create some sort of complex three-dimensional data structure that had lots of numbers in it and behaved in a certain way, you could also create an object that was symbolized by that. And so that's what Java is really about. And so what I really want to do in the next video is demystify the public static void main statement that was made at the beginning of our program in order to give a better understanding of how that works. And in the future, we'll use some specific examples and implementations so we can see how this all really works in the real world when we program. So hopefully that was helpful, and see you in the next video.